Good afternoon. Welcome to all the Circle members and Association of Wine Education members and all our guests from around the world. If you're not members of us, then why not? So, Sarah has worked in wine for over 25 years. She's the founder and director of Swell, a very strategic wine marketing and comms agency. She's a co-founder of the non-profit Old Vine Conference and is a very well-established wine judge around the world. And I've had the pleasure of judging with her. I've also attended many of her masterclasses, both live and online, for the Association of Wine Educators. In fact, the last Prosecco one, I think we had Prosecco, little tiny bottles of Prosecco to taste. And through that, attending various Prosecco courses online, which actually were pretty good. And for those of you who don't know Sarah, she's incredibly passionate about all her subjects. And like all of us, I'm very much looking forward to this particular session on Prosecco. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Vivian, and thank you to the Circle of Wine Writers and Association of Wine Educators for inviting me to join you. I can see very many familiar faces, and I know that many of you have actually very kindly attended some of our previous sessions on previous tastings, virtual tastings on Prosecco, as well as in-person tastings. So we're talking here about a tiny part of the production of Prosecco, but a significant part when it comes to really the identity and heritage, and I would say kind of original soul of Prosecco. So I work for the Consorzio of Conegliano Valdobbiadene, Prosecco Superiore, DOCG, and as part of my role there, my main mission, certainly from a UK perspective, is to explain and differentiate why this consortio, this DOCG for Prosecco is different from particularly the most visible and commercially significant Prosecco, which is Prosecco DOC. And I just want to say that I'm not in any way anti the whole world of Prosecco. Just put it on the record. I think that the phenomenon of the popularity of Prosecco in general in the UK has been a really democratizing force. I think it's fundamentally changed the way that so many people think about wine. It's made certainly sparkling wine move from kind of toasts and special occasions into so many more drinking occasions, including dining occasions, parties, and so on. I think that the growth in Prosecco popularity in the UK has brought many new consumers, and I think into the market with this kind of sense of joyous, kind of light-hearted pleasure. Of course, there are all the associations with Italian culture and lifestyle, and certainly I think I will never not think of Italy as glamorous. And I think so. There are many good things about this huge Prosecco boom. The work that we do with Conegliano Valdobbiadene is really about reintroducing to the market the awareness of the original heart of Prosecco. Sales of Prosecco Superiore, Conegliano Valdobbiadene in the UK are very healthy. The UK is its biggest export market, but they still represent only about 10% of the total Prosecco market in the UK. So I just wanted to give you that bit of context. What I'm going to do is take you through a presentation that really gives the kind of the key facts and figures for the region. And then I'd like to open it out and actually talk to you about some new developments in the region that I've just been told about this week, actually. And I really welcome your questions. I think especially on a Zoom, the last thing you want is me talking at you for an hour. So please do put your questions into the chat, and Vivian will moderate them, and I welcome the questions, so don't be afraid to get in there. Right, so I'm going to start with an overview, a presentation. I hope that's all showing. I always have a slight moment of trepidation when I share a screen. I think it's all working. Right. So, well, it's staggeringly beautiful. I believe actually several people here have been to the region. I think some of you have even been with me. And I think that it's if you haven't been, I think it's almost difficult to conceive of how absolutely beautifully integrated it is. And this landscape, I think, isn't just beautiful because of the morphology, it's the way in which you can see years and years of farming ingenuity and people living their lives just embedded into these hills. And you see that through the patchwork of little farm buildings, the little farmers' huts that are in the vineyards, and also the way in which the villages and towns are really embedded. They're right next to the vineyards. It's a very, very highly densely planted region of about 8,700 hectares. And if you do, if you are asked, invited by the region's viticulturalists to go on a hike through the vineyards, wear extremely comfortable shoes. They're all as fit as mountain goats, and I felt very breathless after just a half an hour walk around there. But anyway, a classic view of the morphology of the Prosecco hills. These hills in Conegliano Valdobbiadene have been designated a UNESCO agricultural heritage site. And actually, I'm just going to quickly mention now that it's because of these rows called Ciglione. You see how green it is and how it's terraced, but it's grass terraces. So these slopes are maintained and protected against erosion by this very particular type of terracing cultivation. So in between the rows is cover crops, it's grass. And you'll also see how interwoven it is with forest. This is a really typical patchwork of this particular region, and it's one of the reasons that it was recognized by UNESCO as an agricultural heritage site, the way in which you have these ciglione and you have these woodlands embedded into the landscape. So a little bit of context. We've just had the economic figures for 2022. So 104 million bottles produced. Compare that to, so in the DOC, it's about, I believe, 500 million bottles. So it may even be slightly more than that. I don't have the very latest figures on the DOC, but anyway, DOCG, Consorzio of Conegliano Valdobbiadene, it's 104 million bottles. The majority of that is the classic Prosecco Superiore. To be Superiore, the wine must be fully spumante. Of that, of this 104 million estimated production, about 2.5% are the Rive. These are the single vineyard bottling wines, and it's become a very successful category for the region. The Consorzio of Conegliano Valdobbiadene is the only denomination within Prosecco that has Rive. It's a tiny proportion of production, but I admit that when we choose wines for masterclasses, I love including Rive because you tend to find they have a really intense expression and a real sense of place. Also, we find that they are often made in a slightly on the drier end of the spectrum, and certainly in the UK, the demand for more dry mineral serious examples of Prosecco is really what the premium on-trade is interested in. So we actually do a lot of tastings of Rive Prosecco, even though they're just 2.5% of the production. And 1.5% is the Superiore di Cartizze, the kind of the golden amphitheatre of the denomination. Just under 3% are frizzante. So frizzante is, bottled at a lower pressure, less fizzy. They are bottled as Conegliano Valdobbiadene, but they don't have the Superiore, because the Superiore must be spumante. And then a tiny proportion of Tranquillo, which is the still prosecco from Conegliano Valdobbiadene. I really love it. It's kind of like Chablis gone on holiday to Italy and chilled out. And it's never exported, but if you go to the region, which I would wish for all of you, and you're having your sort of antipasti, your really deliciously fatty, salty sorpresa, a little glass of Tranquillo is often what you'll have with it. So estimated value of production is 620 million euros. So it's a significant denomination, significant economic and kind of brand Italy power, really. So we're in the Veneto region, northeastern Italy, in between Venice and the Dolomites, a really historic, heritage-rich viticultural area of Italy. And the size of the zone has not changed really significantly, not only since it was first founded in 1969, but actually even before it achieved the official denomination. It's absolutely hemmed in. Every slope that can be planted that is has the correct aspect already is. And so where we are is this golden sort of hexagon in the center. And the region is named Conegliano Valdobbiadene after these two towns, the town on the west and the east, that really set the parameters of the denomination. So Conegliano is in the east. This is where it's softer, more sloping hills. Valdobbiadene in the west, with these very sort of sharp, almost jagged hills and slightly higher altitude, and the soils are very different as well, but we'll come on to that in a bit. Just to put this in context for the whole world of Prosecco, you have two DOCG that make responsible for Prosecco. So one of them is obviously Conegliano Valdobbiadene, the other is Asolo. Asolo also actually makes very nice wine. I think I'm allowed to say that without being vaporized. And those are the two historic centers for making Prosecco and growing Glera grape and making sparkling wine Prosecco. In 2009, there was an expansion of the zone permitted to make Prosecco, and this was created in 2009 and made a DOC as a DOC, and this is the broader green area here. So it's a really interesting kind of consideration that I think if that expansion hadn't happened, we wouldn't have heard of Prosecco. I think that really, if you take a look back, the phenomenal growth in popularity of Prosecco is quite staggering. It wasn't that long ago that it was Asti Spumante that was the biggest selling sparkling wine of Italy. I mean, I remember when I first joined the wine trade, Prosecco was this kind of little local Venetian fizz that no one had really heard of, So it's just, it's just worth taking a moment, I think, just to bear that in mind. So that's your context. This quality pyramid, I should just say that, so I didn't design this quality pyramid, but I really like this slide, so I show it. But actually, you see how it has Asolo here. In fact, Asolo and Conegliano Valdobbiadene are the two DOCGs. So really, this should sort of be a split section But you have the DOC at the as the sort of the fundamental kind of level of quality, and then you have the DOCG, Asolo and Conegliano. Within that, then you have for Conegliano 43 Rive, and then at the very top the Cartizze, which is 108 hectares, pretty much contiguous. That's over in the west of the denomination. It's some of the most expensive vineyard land in Italy. And one of the reasons for that is that this part of Italy, the Veneto, has a real culture of not selling your land. And now, of course, you go to the Veneto and it's one of the most affluent parts of Italy. It was not always thus. You know, this part of Italy was on the front lines of 2 world wars, and they had a devastating effect on the affluence and on the agriculture of these regions. And it's a really it's got a kind of contadini, almost like farmer mentality still, that people really hold on to their land. And actually the Cartizze, I believe, is still the most expensive vineyard land in Italy, which I always find quite interesting when you think of all the other far more kind of acclaimed wines of Italy. The morphology is really important, and the steepness of the slope is really important, and it means that different sites can have very different aspects and also produce wines of very different personalities. I think there's a bit of a tendency to think of Prosecco as kind of almost a bit of an industrial blob of a wine, you know, that it's kind of made to be popular and to do a job. Actually, here, the topography and the way in which the terrain is so varied really plays into a very nuanced expression of style. And that's something that we do a lot of work on when we're doing our tastings. And those of you who've been on the tastings with me will know this, that actually they have very different expressions. And the steepness of the slope and the altitude is key. It also puts a kind of a sort of a requirement, really a duty on the people who farm these slopes to look after them. And actually the training and the trellising is very particular here, and they follow the contours of the slope. It's actually a really crazy place to try to plant a vineyard, but anyway, they did it. It worked out. But altitude is really important, and whenever we do tastings, we always include the altitude of the vineyard where the wine is from, just to put that into context. So it's very cool, bright, breezy, it's high and steep between the sea, foothills of the Alps, and they have this extension from east to west, so you're exposed to the sun, and they predominantly are on south-facing slopes, but there's a lot of nuancing within that, a bit like what you would get, for example, in Piemonte. It's not a particularly dry region, although it is sunny and warm, but it's actually really key, the rainfall. You see how green it is. Without that rain, those ciglione, those grass terraces, could not be sustained. So it's one of these sort of happy intersections of ingenuity and environment. Lots of work done on the soils. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we've got sort of quite a lot to cover. But I'm very happy to give you more information. And in fact, if anyone is interested in this kind of detail, yes, this is a really fabulous book. I've got a few copies. You know, maybe, well, you can drop me a line. I'll put my email in the chat if you'd like to receive a copy. I should just say that's for UK people only, sorry.
Sarah,
yes,
there's a few questions I'm building up, if you wouldn't mind. The first one is there a list of Rive, and how many? I think we've established there's 43 now. There's
43, yes. There is a list. It's on the denomination website, but also I can send you the the link. I mean, some of the Rive you will see far more frequently than others, and then some of the Rive can be grouped together under a single name. But yes, there's 43, and we can send you a list. I can see question from Rosemary Brown. How many growers? There are 3,400 growers in Conegliano Valdobbiadene. The average size of the holding, I don't have that. I mean, the hectareage is 8,700, but some of the growers will have, you know, an acre. Some will have several hectares. The trend has been more and more for smaller azienda agricola to actually set up in Conegliano Valdobbiadene, as the kind of prosperity and the demand and the opportunity for Prosecco is grown. What is very clear about Conegliano Valdobbiadene is that there's lots of young people working in viticulture and coming back to their family farms, and actually, rather than the grapes being sold as they would have done maybe when granddad or dad had it, there's many more of these sort of small azienda agricola setting up. I'll ask the consortio about the average size of the holdings. Some more. Sorry, I'm just flicking through the chat. Okay, I think I've covered all that. Is that okay?
There's a question there actually from Heather. She's come through
Yes.
as me, but it
Sorry,
says, do you
Heather.
have any ideas of actual price of the land in euros per hectare?
For Cartizze,
I don't know, Heather's.
I've unmuted myself. Sorry. No, just in general, for the DOCG, just in case you have an idea.
No, but I can find out. I mean, I can tell you there's a bit of a local joke. There's a chap who owns a hectare of Cartizze, and his nickname locally is Mario the Billionaire. I don't think he is a billionaire, but it's becoming, it's certainly, I know the value of land has gone up, but so what that means is that these family farms have been able to borrow on the value of their land, being able to invest in their wineries. And I was talking to one of the growers whose 2 children are now working with him. They'd gone to the University at Conegliano, which is the oldest wine university in Italy. And then they thought they were going to go and, you know, make wine and work abroad. And he said, actually, they've both been able to come back and work with me. Whereas before we had this sort of Prosecco boom, we wouldn't have been able to develop and invest, and we couldn't have sustained 3 families from this. So I like to just talk about this because I think that Prosecco, and as a category with a small p, is kind of the category that lots of wine experts love to hate. You know, it's almost that it's seen as rather infra-dig or, you know, presumptuous, impertinent. Where's this wine come from that everyone loves and just wants to drink, and we didn't tell them to, you know? And I think that the conversation, the talk about this other side of Prosecco, you can't divorce it from the boom that there has been just in this drink that people simply find so easy to pleasantly enjoy. But I will make a note of that, and I'm just going to make a note of that, otherwise I will forget. I'll come back to you. Okay. Everything is done by hand. They call it heroic viticulture. 600 hours manual labor per hectare per year on these slopes. It's about 10 times the amount that goes into the flatlands and in the DOC or Prosecco Treviso DOC. This is the UNESCO Heritage accreditation. So the concept of agricultural heritage as part of cultural heritage has really taken off in the last 10 years. So UNESCO, which obviously is very famous for cultural heritage, you know, temples, palaces, sites, you know, archaeological kind of digs, etc., instituted a category of agricultural heritage, and this was alongside the United Nations Food and Farming Organization implementing GIAS, which is globally important agricultural heritage systems. And I think that this is a really healthy returning respect for how important agriculture is, not just to our past, but to our future, and how agriculture must be, and when it is, good agriculture is integrated into society's artistic culture and financial and economic affluence and sustainability, and rural affluence as well. So the UNESCO accreditation was awarded because of this agricultural sort of patchwork that I mentioned before, these hogback hills and the way in which they have been so successfully cultivated is really extraordinary. And the development of these ciglione, which is the grass terraces, is really particular and unique, and as I say, tied to the region, because if you didn't have that morphology with that rainfall, with that kind of know-how, those ciglione would not have developed. So it's not terraced with stones or bricks, it's actually terraced with, as I say, this organic matter and with this natural grasses and so on. There is more information on the UNESCO agricultural heritage protection. It's really worth reading, and I warn you, we'll probably go down a rabbit hole following all the other beautiful agricultural heritage sites in the world, like the saffron fields of Kashmir and the wasabi sort of fields of Japan. But grape varieties, Glera must have a minimum of 85%. In Conegliano Valdobbiadene in particular, there are many producers also working with the other varieties, Verdiso, Bianchetta, Pereira, Glera Lunga. I don't come across many working with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, although it is permitted. There's actually a couple of growers who kind of go slightly off-piste and just have cuvées without Glera, with Verdiso, Bianchetta and Pereira. Marchiori is one of those producers. Although it's not bottled, it's not labeled as Conegliano Valdobbiadene. But there's a lot of Massal selection, and there's actually a lot of old vines in Conegliano Valdobbiadene as well. Styles. So these categorizations of styles are an EU-wide categorization. I mean, I'm always, normal humans are always telling me, oh, this is really confusing, because we would expect dry to be the driest. But the typologies, as they call them, as the Italians call them, they're made. So Prosecco Superiore is made in all of these typologies. The most common commercially, and the most popular, the most commonly made, is extra dry. So from 12 to 17 grams per litre of residual sugar. We're seeing many more brut and extra brut being made, especially in Rive, but it's still, a minority of the style. And I just would like to stress that the way that the producers approach these different typologies, they will decide on the destiny of the wine in terms of its residual sugar according to the attributes of the vineyard and its site. So if they're making a brut or an extra brut, typically they will be looking for a site where they know they get a more intense expression, where they know that there will be a certain feeling of richness and a kind of tempered ripeness in the wine. If they're making an extra dry, they will be looking for sites and give grapes with, fresher acidity, perhaps with that more kind of green fruit character. So it's not a question that, you make a base wine, a vat of wine is made, and then you play around with the charging of the vat before fermentation, second fermentation, so that, one pot can give 4 different typologies. It's a selective process. And it's really fascinating, actually, to go around and talk with the producers about how they approach this. Yes, we talked a little bit about rive. Rive is a local term, a local word, but meaning steep slope. It's a dialect word. And it's a small amount of the production, as we saw, less than 3%, but it's been very successful commercially. And I think actually what we're seeing, when we do our presentations in the UK, when we present those rive wines, especially to the on-trade, which of course is so important in seeding and raising an elevated profile and a kind of raising the reputation of any wine, that the rive are a real pull. And a little picture of one of the rive there. This is, I know this rive, and the name will come to me in a moment. But anyway, a little bit about the Cartizze. Apologies, my mouse is super sensitive. So Cartizze is actually the wine that was mentioned even before Prosecco was. So it's mentioned in letters going back to, I think, the 1700s, because this part of Italy, just outside Venice, under the La Serenissima, the time when basically Venice ruled the world, this was where some of the most powerful families, not just in Italy, but in the world at that time, they would have their country estates, their country farms. They were out here in what is now Conegliano Valdobbiadene. And so the Cartizze is a name that has been conjured with for many, many years, actually centuries. And Cartizze, when you go there, you can feel a scent. It's always breezy when you go to Conegliano Valdobbiadene, but in Cartizze, there's a sense of the breeze being very delicate. And it is a natural amphitheatre. You have a very particular soils, a high proportion of sandstone, and you do get a sort of a golden peachy ripeness coming through in the fruit. So traditionally Cartizze would have been a sweet wine, and in fact there is some evidence to suggest that it would have been almost like a passito wine. So Cartizze is what Italians serve at weddings, etc. And in fact, when I talk with independent wine shops and importers and people sort of who are getting behind premium Prosecco, they say to me, actually, Cartizze is something that we find we can sell. Interestingly enough, if you have a Cartizze wine, it doesn't say Prosecco on the label, it will say Superiore di Cartizze. But we are seeing more dry styles of Cartizze being made, which I think can be really delicious. But I have to say, I think a great Cartizze made in that kind of dry style with that higher level of residual sugar, but with the balancing acidity, is simply a joyous wine. And I think, you know, we shouldn't judge sugar with our eyes or with our kind of on tasting notes. We should judge it on our palates. So that's just a little bit of context. I can see we've got some questions in the chat. So shall I go through the chat? So
why not? Yeah, I think there's more observations than questions.
Meg, do you want to make your observation? No.
Yes, hi, thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. This was really fantastic. I've had the privilege of traveling in the region as recently as last fall, and everything you said just drew a bright line underneath some of the learning that I was able to get while there. You know, in the US, Prosecco does have a little bit of, as Leah mentioned, a sort of cheap and cheerful reputation. Not the DOCG wines, however. But there really was an explosion of popularity of the Aperol Spritz in the US, and it was all over Instagram. I mean, it's just, it's a pretty beverage, even if it's not always very delicious. A little too sweet generally, but it has, I think, raised awareness of Prosecco. It's not just that, you know, a bottle of Mignetto on the shelf that people think about now. I think people are thinking, oh, Prosecco, maybe we should try this alone as a beverage. Maybe we should try a slightly more expensive one. Maybe we'll get more enjoyment or pleasure out of it. So I think it's potentially for educators, like many of us on this call, I think can be a way in to talk about it in a way that it doesn't feel like you're introducing something effete. It feels like you're introducing something that they already have some experience with. So
Yes.
That's just an observation.
I have to tell you that when I was in Conegliano just before the pandemic, we went to the university there, which is the oldest wine university in Italy, and it is did you go there? It's an adorable building. This kind of
we in the fall we drove by, but in the past I did actually, a couple years ago, I did actually go in. Yeah.
Well, we went in and we came across this room where they were conducting some research on the best iterations of Aperol Spritz, and they had about 20 different Amaro, but they were like artisanal Amaro made from different producers from all around the region. And then they were trying it with, so they had different types of orange, you know, the blood orange, this orange, that orange. They had, and they were trying it with different types of Prosecco Superiore of different typologies. And they were so serious, you know, they had this classroom with their kind of measuring jugs and all the different, you know, ingredients, all the different wines and Amaro lined up. They were taking their notes, and it was just one of the best things I've ever seen. And for me, that was so Italian, you know, come on, let's do this, you know, this Aperol thing sort of seriously. And I think what tends to happen with beautiful Italian drinks is that, you know, there's a kind of exigency when the sale is first sniffed, you know, and then it turns into this juggernaut, and then you then, as a communicator or as a marketer, you're then engaged in a kind of slightly catch-up mission where you're then saying, but don't forget, this is the great stuff. They kind of do it the other way around to the French, where the great stuff, you know, leads and trickles down. And but I see this a lot whenever I market Italian wines, that, you know, it becomes the everyday pleasure that fixes in people's minds. And I think that we just have to keep talking about this other side and encourage the producers as well to lead with their best, and to have that kind of confidence. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit in sort of the last 10-15 minutes about some initiatives that I was sent confirmation of just yesterday, actually, and these are around sustainability in the region, and really the Consorzio Conegliano Valdobbiadene has done an enormous amount on authentic environmental sustainability for about 15-20 years. And I'm just going to actually, I think I will share my screen. I appreciate this may not be like the most graceful way to share the information with you, but it'll help me just remember to mention everything. So the materials produced by the Consorzio, by the way, are excellent. And we have a really thorough press pack, which explains, let me see, is that visible for you? Is that okay? I'm going to use it as a guide when I speak to you, but essentially you always get these, well, in the UK we get quite a few headlines which are generated by the, oh, you're all enjoying that thing, let me tell you why it's evil. So we get a lot of inaccurate, rather snarky headlines around things like, oh, Prosecco is rotting your teeth, prosecco is chopping down woodland. And what tends to happen is that there's well, the teeth rotting thing is clearly rubbish, but the whole the kind of the perception that there's been this juggernaut of prosecco which has kind of pillaged its way through environment and countryside and expanded at all cost is a weird but yet actually quite tenacious perception. And in fact, this consortium has been really embedded in environment for absolutely decades because they all live right next to the vineyards. This isn't somewhere where people drive out to their land. They're absolutely next to it. Their schools are in the villages that are surrounded by vineyards. So they worked for 10 years to ban glyphosate, and they brought it in on January 2019 through the whole area, which is actually an enormous achievement to get something like that banned. Ruled out. You have to get every single commune on board. You're having to get each of the individual mayors and the municipal authorities involved. So glyphosate is banned. They're now working on eventually phasing out artificial nitrates in the soil, for example, which is to do with really boosting the organic matter of the soil. And these kind of ambitions are really, I think, visionary and big. And it's the kind of thing that, doesn't necessarily get the headlines, but getting this kind of approval through is really enormous. And it takes a lot of commitment and determination. So glyphosate is banned. They implemented a viticultural protocol at the beginning. They started work on, I think, mid 2000s, and then implemented, published annually since 2011. So they have a really excellent team of viticultural analysts and advisors who are not just from the region, but they've worked all around the world. They're experts basically in sustainable integrated viticulture. And they have this program of measuring. They have measuring stations all through the denomination, and they're constantly monitoring the conditions. And then they give advance notice guidelines to the producers, depending on where the producers are, where their nearest station is, on what they should be considering in terms of the treatment in their vineyards, but all with the emphasis on the least possible intervention. So they're basically helping them across the region to have this integrated viticulture. And they now have, I think it was about 60% of the production of the consortio was produced in adherence to this viticultural protocol. They then went a step further, and they introduced this this one here, the SQNPI, the little b, which is an Italy-wide, agricultural-wide protocol accreditation system for what the French call lutte intégrée, integrated agriculture. This is like a step up, if you like, from the viticultural protocol, because it goes across agriculture, and it's an accredited national initiative. And they have to show that essentially the way in which their vineyards are farmed is that any synthetic treatments, fertilizers, pesticides are only used when absolutely necessary. So it's integrated and sustainable from the point of view of the environment, but also from the point of view of human lives. And I think, and unless you have a sustainable system that allows people to thrive, it will not be sustainable. So they do a lot of work also on encouraging and training the producers actually in what's required. And the the number of producers actually now, if you like, moving up from the viticultural protocol to this level has increased. And in 2022, the consortium announced that 55% of all of their production is now produced under the accreditation of this sustainable integrated farming. I mean, I think that's really amazing that you get that level, which it's only been running since 2016, and this is a big thing for them. They started working last year with Fondazione Simbola. So Fondazione Simbola is an Italian integrated cultural and agricultural foundation, and essentially working with this organization that's a specialist in helping Italian companies or collectives to maintain high quality and a sense of luxury, but with sustainability. And working with this foundation, they've basically come up with this concept called a Green Academy. And this Green Academy has, I'm just going to turn that off because you don't want to keep looking at that. So this Green Academy looks at all aspects of production, climate, environment, human affluence, and kind of, the kind of sustainability of human lives lived in this rural environment. And they are looking especially at climate change. And one of the projects they're looking at is kind of future-proofing what if. And as part of that, they're working with a group of Egyptologists. And these Egyptologists are experts in Egyptian farming cultivation techniques, especially around soil erosion, extreme weather events, water conservation. And they basically are scenario planning for 2029, one in between, and then 2100. We won't be here by then. And because what they have realized is that these ancient civilizations actually had a lot of agricultural wisdom on dealing with a climate that was often very much drier or more extreme than our own. And as part of that, for example, they've actually already gone off on this track where they're using some of the research done by the Egyptologists on water conservation, because water is so important to the region and things are getting drier there. But you can imagine if they have a big drop in rainfall, what happens to the Chilione, which is sustained by grass. So so that's just some of the sustainability initiatives. And I do have a very Italian press release, a kind of press update on the Green Academy, which I will really happily share with you. It also goes into the work on maintaining and improving soil organic matter. I mean, I love this stuff. I know it might not be for all audiences, but if you are writing or considering on issues of climate change or sustainability, I would say that the Consortia of Conegliano Valdobbiadene are doing really fascinating things. And Julia from the Consortio is an absolute mine of information and would be able to put you in touch with the sources if you wanted to follow up on this as an angle. So I think that's me. You asked me to be 40 minutes. Is that right? Any questions? I'd just like to say thank you for your time and your consideration. Please do get in touch if you'd like to receive some samples. If you're either for an imminent article or piece of work or just for general research, let me know. And I'm going to have a little glass now.
Well, cheers.
Cheers.
What a beautiful region and such diverse topography and terrain. I have to say, I've got to buy some more Rives and try and remember what they're like. And thank you for putting the list in the chat, Liam.
Yes.
I think it's an enormous list. I don't know if we can capture that rather than lose it once we lose the session. You've definitely whetted our appetite for more knowledge, Sarah. Perhaps we could do another course like you did for AWE. I'm sure
Yes.
the circle would definitely love to do something like that again.
Yeah, with pleasure.
That's great. A really fascinating insight, and particularly the latest sustainable implementations that are going on within the area. It really has been an amazing hour of talking. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. There's a lot to cover. I really appreciate your time and your attention. Ruma, Pink Prosecco is the Consorzio doesn't make the Conegliano Valdobbiadene does not produce Pink Prosecco. They feel that they just don't want to have lots of Pinot Noir planted everywhere. So it's a Prosecco DOC thing. Again, Pink Prosecco, such fun. I adore Kylie. Go Kylie. But I think that the drinks business recently did a whole article on Pink Prosecco and market and growth, and I think you'll find all the stats you need in there. I think it's free to view. If you have any trouble finding it, just drop me a line.